Good morning, everyone. My name is Ashley Bond. I am the conference event coordinator, filling in for Adam this morning, who unfortunately, I believe, got stuck back in 1955 with Dave Kennedy. Once today's sessions are over, I will pull a team together immediately to see what we can do about that. But we welcome you and thank you for joining Retreat 2020 this week. Certainly hope you've enjoyed it. Huge thank you to all of our wide host of incredible speakers. Today's session is a bit of a departure from the rest of the week. We have one of the most accomplished and competitive hackers and a world-renowned OSINT specialist, Joe Gray, who will give a live demonstration of the tools, tips, and techniques of the trade. Joe will also give a live demonstration of various search techniques used by the good guys and the bad guys. Joining Joe, we have a quite sharp but paranoid CISO, Chris Wallace, the CISO of our very own Buncombe County. While Joe outlines how to find someone that does not want to be found, Chris counters with some very interesting techniques to avoid being found. Please join me in welcoming Chris Wallace and Joe Gray. Welcome, guys.
Thanks for having us. Can you please enable screen sharing?
Yes. You guys should be good.
Sounds like a plan. There we go. Can everyone see my screen okay? Okay, perfect there. Going ahead and getting started, we will kick it off with introductions. We'll start with Chris, and then I'll introduce myself, and then we will get where the rubber meets the road. Off to you, Chris.
Okay, so I am the Chief Information Security Officer for Buncombe County. I've been in IT for a bit over 20 years, mostly healthcare and government. I retired between those two industry moves when we moved to Asheville. Did some raft guiding, taught some lightweight backpacking out west. Basically, I got burnt out for a little while. Tried to retire, didn't work. Obviously, that was my first retirement fail. Since getting into InfoSec, I've become kind of a privacy nut. Thus the paranoid piece. So yeah, I mean, I'm paranoid a little, maybe. Depends on who you ask. I know Joe and I both follow some people that are significantly more paranoid than I am. So that's me.
And I am Joe Gray. I am not a CISO at any point, but I had to make the joke there. I am a bit paranoid myself as well. I think between Chris and myself, we're different types of paranoid based on we have different threat models, which will be something that we discuss later in the presentation. By day, I'm a senior OSINT specialist at a company called Complex. And I also teach open source intelligence courses, OSINT courses, through my company, the OSINTion. I did some time in the Navy navigating submarines. I'm in the final edit stages of releasing my first book called Practical Social Engineering. That'll be published in February via No Starch Press. There's a link. I understand it is an HTTP link, but that is quite literally only a redirect domain. I do compete in quite a bit of CTFs in addition to running CTFs. I ran the CTF for the students for this conference yesterday, but as a competitor, from the solo perspective, I'm the 2017 DerbyCon Social Engineering Capture the Flag winner. And despite not speaking French, I was the runner-up last year at the Hackfest Quebec Social Engineering Capture the Flag. Those of you who may be aware of how that conference runs, there is a time during some conferences that they will do the social engineering capture the flag, and you may be aware of the about 20 minutes in the semi-soundproof, poorly ventilated box in front of an audience, calling and making phishing calls to a target company. And that's the part that everyone knows about. The part that they don't know about is the 6 to 12 weeks prior, when the contestants are assigned their target organization, and they have to go through and collect, I think it's a total of 35 flags on their target company and produce a cohesive OSINT report. So both competitions run identically. The difference with the one in Quebec is I had to tiptoe and tap dance a lot more and use the phrase "parlez-vous anglais" a little bit more and come up with creative excuses as to why a non-French speaking person was calling these French Canadian companies. I also did a solo competition in a missing person CTF and ended up getting 3rd place. But I'm also a member of the CTF team, the Password Inspection Agency. And we got 3rd place 2 years in a row at the Nolicon OSINT CTF. And then we got 2nd place at Hackfest Quebec in a missing person CTF. And most recently, we won the OSINT Search Party, which is the new term for the missing persons CTF at DEF CON 28. So that being said, I have a friend who once told me that I had a face made for radio, so I'm just going to kill my video. We were consulting with our handlers, Chris and I were, prior to this presentation. And one of our handlers stayed in a Holiday Inn Express one time and told us that we needed to say something to the effect of, the thoughts and opinions in this presentation does not reflect that of our employers, past, present, or future. So we think we are covered, but nevertheless, the objectives of this presentation, we don't really have a whole lot of slides, to be honest. Start to finish, we have 42, which is the answer to everything per Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So we've broken this up into various sections, and what we intend on doing is to talk about some objectives in terms of myths, and then we're going to talk about offense, defense, and then within defense, where we are really going to try to focus will be within the operations security. So starting with the myths, I'm going to pass it to Chris momentarily to get us started there.
Okay, so social media myths. One of the things, and that Joe and I may differ on opinion on some of these, is don't have social media, right? Don't create a Twitter account, don't create a Facebook account, Pinterest. I can't even think of all of them at this point. Because if you don't have social media, it's harder to find you. And it's maybe true to some degree. It's probably harder for people that aren't very good at OSINT to find you. So yeah, sorry, Joe's handling the slides here. So don't have social media. Deleting your social media doesn't really do anything. It's out on the internet. If it's been on the internet, it's on the internet. You literally cannot delete yourself from the internet, especially as far as something like that goes. And if you're a threat model, depending on who you are and how popular you are, somebody is probably screenshotting everything you say. So deleting your social media doesn't work. There's been multiple people that have found that out on Twitter for something, I can remember a couple of comedians where they said something 20 years ago, deleted it, changed their opinion. It's not who they are today, but it's come back to bite them. Privacy, they do not care. You are the product. There's a, what is the quote? If you're not paying for the product, you probably are the product. And then you have nothing to hide. Again, back to the 20-year-old Twitter comments. You may not think you have what you say today may not be something you think you need to hide, but in 10 years when you're trying to get a job and it comes back to bite you, you're probably going to wish you either never said it or obviously you do have something to hide. Next slide.
So something I hear quite frequently, especially out of some of my older family members, would be, I'm boring. Nobody wants my information. Well, that's not always the case. Or I'm a nobody. My information is worthless. I'm not important enough for a bad guy to care about. The whole Russia and China thing is a hoax. So breaking these myths down in conjunction with what we discussed on the previous slide, the biggest thing I can tell you, the best analogy I can use for this in terms of putting anything on the internet is you can't put toothpaste back in the tube. And even if you might be able to get part of it back in there, but you're not going to be able to get it all in there. And it's kind of like glitter. You know, if you bring glitter out, it's going to get on everything. And basically, between screenshots, archiving site, data retention requirements set forth by legislation, and just the nature of the beast, things will linger on the internet. And even if you consider yourself boring or your information worthless, here's the thing. There's a whole industry on the dark web, and not even completely on the dark web, part of it's even on the public internet, where trading people's information is worthwhile for these criminals, because they are able to take out lines of credit. They are able to steal your identity. They are able to take over your account. The information on your account may be worthless per se, but at the same time, having access to your account to gain influence to your connections is not worthless. Having your information with your maybe not perfect credit score, but not a bad credit score, is not worthless either, because you may be boring. You may post pictures of casseroles and cat videos, but you pay your bills on time and you have a credit score in the high 6 to low 700s. There's a lot of damage that could be done there. I apologize. My Newfoundland was just chewing on his paws. He was having what I call a hot hand and cheese. And he coughed a little bit there. So my apologies for that. But, China and Russia, with them, and they're not the only countries that do that kind of stuff. I'm going to abstain from further comment there, just because that's a rabbit hole in and of itself that we could take up multiple hours of conversation on, in terms of their techniques and tactics for both disinformation, which we will talk about later, but we're going to talk about it from a more ethical perspective. And basically, they both run influence operations including disinformation, deception, and misinformation. And with disinformation, that's bad information. That's information that we don't want, that is purposely misleading. And then the problem that comes with that is that you have some people who are too trusting and naive who share it. They're not sharing it for the purpose of disinformation. They're doing it more for misinformation. And misinformation is a lot more innocent in many cases. It could be that they are operating off speculation, or what we in the intelligence industry call rumint. It's just something that's there. Again, those are not the only two countries. There are criminal organizations that will do the exact same thing. That's why we've seen the rise of things like QAnon and some of the other far left and far right groups, because they are able to take over accounts. They are able to win over influencers. They are able to compromise information to get someone over a barrel, so to speak. So some other myths that I've ran into that are subscription based, meaning you don't pay for the myths, but you get what would be more of a false sense of security with this, would be, I pay for LifeLock or another similar service, because a lot of organizations have those out there. Or I was talking to an old Navy buddy who was posting something. I don't recall what he had posted, but it was something that was not very sound from a security and privacy perspective. And I was like, hey, you might not want to do that. Here's the reasons for not doing so. I think he was talking about visiting certain types of websites, and I'm not talking like anything illegal, but I think it was something similar to like WikiLeaks. And he's still active duty military. And I was like, hey, you might get in trouble for that. And his response was, oh, well, I use such and such DNS provider. And I don't remember which one, but you can think of something like Quad 8 or Quad 9. Those DNS providers, their IP addresses are 8.8.8.8 or 9.9.9.9.9. Whew, I never thought I would get tongue-tied on numbers. But something like that, that doesn't necessarily protect you from that perspective. But then you also run on to the opposite side of the coin of, oh, I use such and such VPN. And to be honest, in the privacy world, I don't see that brag occur too terribly much. Every now and then I will. But usually when that brag comes about, it's someone using a free VPN. And that goes back to Chris's point. If you are not paying for the product, you are the product. And I'm going to insert a little fine print onto that statement. And sometimes, even if you are paying for the product, you are still the product. A perfect example of that would be social media ads. Because let's face it, most search engines and most social media platforms are nothing but advertising firms that just happen to provide some sort of service with some perceived value to get people to use them, to give them their information. I know that's starting to sound a little tinfoil, but realistically, if you look at how Facebook makes money, they make money via ads and other stuff. And I'll just leave the other stuff alone. We're too close to an election for me to even get on that rant. But you've got to factor in something that when you're going through learning the information security world, we talk about defense in depth all the time. That's something that we just beat over our head. And then we have words like onion, so we can peel back the layers of defense. And the point that we are starting to allude to, that we will dive deeper into as we progress through this presentation, is that you can't rely on one particular solution. Don't put all your eggs in the same basket. This is something that has to be curated over time. You have to do it routinely. It's not a one and done thing, and you have to invest in it. So with that, Chris, what other frustrating myths and bad advice have you heard from this specific lens and arena, if you will?
Think. I mean, so on one side of this, and this is something that Joe tends to kind of preach to, you can take your personal privacy, your personal security, all the way to the nth degree. If you have a spouse or you have kids who don't do the same thing, then it doesn't really do you any good. I mean, maybe a little, but if you're not on the internet and you never post pictures of yourself and nobody knows, you've left your house and you've gone on vacation, but your wife's posting pictures of you having drinks on the beach to Facebook every 5 minutes and tagging you, then it all your work is kind of for naught. So that's one thing.
That definitely brings up the philosophy of, if you are a defender, when we think offense versus defense within the cyber world, as a defender, the thing is, you kind of have to be right every time. As an attacker, and this is one reason why I like the offensive side of security more so than the defensive side, you only have to be right once. When we think to some of the major data breaches like Equifax and Target and some of the others, you only have to be right once. You don't have to get it right every time. It only takes one single slip up, one single mistake for someone to be able to grab that little bit of yarn hanging off your sweater and then let you continue walking around with it, and eventually you are without a shirt and exposed. So and at the end of the day, even a broken clock is right twice a day. So you've got to prepare for what happens when something goes south, because it's not if something goes south, it's when something goes south.
I mean, so using a VPN, you need a VPN. I mean, probably, depending on what you want to use it for. Uh, just and this may Joe may touch on this again too, but a VPN is not for your personal use. A VPN is not really a security tool. It is a privacy tool, and what type or what layer of privacy you get from using one depends a lot. Depends on the provider. Depends on where they're, and I think we get into this later too. Depends on where the provider's located, what country they're based in, what laws they're subject to. Um, uh, so VPNs definitely, I wouldn't say it's bad advice to use one. I would say it depends. And then that's where the threat modeling comes in.
Absolutely. And using a VPN is great advice, but it's not absolute advice. That's the important point that we are trying to drive with regards to this. Because using a VPN is great, but there are a lot of other things that you should consider doing depending on your threat model, your budget, and your concerns, what keeps you up at night whenever you go about doing that. We do have a question about a VPN and DNS preference. My preference is yes, and I hate to be vague. For VPNs, honestly, it's a lot easier for me to say the companies or providers that I don't trust. For the most part, there are a few out there that are good. Within the privacy world, the Proton brand, in terms of Proton Mail, Proton Drive, and Proton VPN, they are quite frequently viewed as the golden standard. And I was just thinking about that link, Chris. So thanks for sharing that. They're considered a golden standard. They have you're paying for it. They have a free tier. I don't trust free anything when it comes to this, even with Proton. The thing about Proton is they are based out of Switzerland. So while they are not an EU, a Five Eyes, Nine Eyes, 14 Eyes country, they do cooperate. So that is something to keep in mind. And when you're assessing these, you want to find out who's logging what and who they have to, who they are subjected to. And I just clicked the link here to kind of give you the idea here. So we can look at this detailed comparison here, and we see that there are numerous entries. So I'm going to click all, and I'm going to regret this. I already know it. But the big ones on here, you have Proton, the other one, private internet access. A lot of people like to go with it, but it's in the United States. Nord is kind of popular, but they've had a little bit of a snafu at times. They don't have the best public persona. So while they do meet most of the green boxes, you've got to be careful with that. Another one that I hear a lot of people talking about is Molvad, but they're part of a 14 Eyes country, being in Sweden. So keep that in mind. And then like right here, for example, we see that Pure VPN, it was rated very highly as well, but it's in Hong Kong, which given world events now, I don't necessarily trust that. So that's definitely something that one must consider. In terms of DNS providers, in all honesty, I don't have a favorite per se, aside from myself. And what I mean by that is I have a Raspberry Pi 4 sitting in my office right now, plugged into my switch. I have a 24 port switch on my desk connected to my wireless router, and I'm running what is called a Pi hole on it. And I will even go as far as to show you the pie hole. With this, I have domains listed that will block. For those of you who are parents, this can work really well for limiting your children's use of social media or things that may be a little bit more risque. You can limit the time and you can filter some of the content. But the purpose of a pie hole is not necessarily for filtering. It is to pick up and sinkhole, hence the pun on pie hole. It is to sinkhole malicious domains and domains associated with things that aren't necessarily very nice. Sorry for that inflection. I just watched the second Borat movie. But basically, this whole thing came about because of a thing called malvertising, which was where adversaries were paying for advertising space and they were putting malicious code within their advertisements. So when the advertisements would load, the malicious code would execute. And as you can see here, I'm actually in the Brave browser. That's what I've got loaded here. And I typically don't use Brave in presentations. I use Firefox typically, but because I've got the pie hole in line now, I'm having problems with CAPTCHAs and other things. So I'm having to use Brave and Safari a little bit more frequently. Unfortunately, like yesterday when I was doing the CTF, CrackStation, as well as the EXIF viewer online, they both require CAPTCHA. And if you're on Brave or you've got some of the privacy plugins that I have on Firefox in there, you have to click through 8 or 9 CAPTCHA images just to get through it. So that's something that you have to consider because they can't fingerprint who you are as easily. But as you can see here, I've got the Brave stuff going on. Right here is EFF's Privacy Badger. I've got it turned off for this site because I run this site. I trust it. I've got some other ad blockers like uBlock Origin right here. I've got some other OSINT type things like right here is Fluff Busting Purity. That's a Facebook add-in that disables advertisements. And prior to last weekend, it would actually keep you on the old Facebook interface, which was really cool. Revert Site is their partner project as well. But then because I do OSINT on international entities, there's Google Translate. Got a few other things like I can save to Zotero. That allows me to capture websites and store them for later use. Zotero is free. Another thing that we use in the OSINT world is called Hunchly. That costs about $120 a year to capture sites. It will basically clone the HTML and it will also print it into a PDF and save it. It'll take a hash. It maintains integrity. It's very popular amongst the OSINT community, as well as law enforcement. And then right here, this tool built with, I'm going to click it for this, but this is more of an offensive tool. Yeah, it's not, I can't query it. So it relies on a web query. So we'll have to do that on an actual public website. But basically it tells us what technologies are in use. And then within Firefox, I also have a user agent string manipulator so that I can appear to be in other parts of the world by changing my language settings, or I can make it appear as if I'm on a mobile device or I'm using a different type of browser or operating system. So there's a lot of things that one could do with this. Regarding Pi-hole, I think I can show my DNS settings with it, and then we'll move on from this. Because this is my home DNS system. And in terms of settings for my DNS, I've got it set to Open DNS as well as Quad 9. So you can set it up to all sorts of things here, and you can, like right there is DNSSEC. You can do conditional forwarding, so it goes from one host to another. So that works really well. Of course, you've got your own DHCP that you can deal with here as well. And then I've even created local DNS records. So like there's Apple TV in the bedroom. Yes, I do have an IoT door lock. When I get bored, I've got to have something to hack. Same thing with the Alexa, the Ecobee, my Jetson Nano. I've got Kali and several other things. This works really well for things to play with, just so that you can compartmentalize. Full disclosure, I also do in addition to like OSINT, OPSEC, and social engineering, I do things on the attack side of the house from time to time. I do penetration testing and play the bad guy. It's always fun doing that. But I also have several honeypots just hanging out on the internet collecting malware. So whenever I have to modify my network to be able to protect everything else on the network, that pie hole comes in very handy in doing so if it tries to phone home, because I can straight up say anything that this IP address tries to connect to, block it, period. So I'm able to detonate things and prevent bad things from happening while still learning about a lot of things, kind of like what happened with WannaCry back in 2017 when it beacons out to that other website. And if the other website is not reachable, it won't execute. But in doing the research, you see that beacon, you now know. I feel like I've been talking for ages and my caffeine level's a little bit low. So I'm going to mute and let Chris take over for a moment before we move to the next slide.
Yeah, I was going to add just so I mean, right today, personally, I use Proton's VPN. I am actually looking at standing up my own. Two reasons for that. One is if you do use a VPN, one of these big names that a lot of other people are using as well, the IP addresses you come from tend to get put on either blacklists or you end up with what Joe was talking about, where you're going through 15 captchas to get to a website. And this is where we start to balance convenience and security, right? We always say convenience trumps security. And in the enterprise, that's usually true. At a personal level, you kind of control that. So you may have to jump through some extra hoops if you want to have your privacy. Between the captchas and the VPNs, some of the browser extensions that block things. I mean, you can lock your browser down, especially with Firefox and some of the extensions in there. You can lock it down so far that you don't even, I mean, you basically have a plain text web page that gets displayed. And it looks like raw HTML. There's no styling to it. I mean, it literally looks like you went to a web page in Notepad. It's or you just, nothing works. The scripts don't load, the images don't load.
Yep.
And the page
I had that problem yesterday.
Yeah.
In the CTF yesterday, we could look at the for the scoreboard itself. We could see the scores, but we couldn't see the graphical representation of the scoreboard. And I tried it in every single browser on my Mac. So basically everything but Internet Explorer / Edge. And because of the pie hole, it just wouldn't load. So right here, if you want to roll your own VPN without going off and buying an appliance like a Pulse VPN or a Cisco ASA, this is an open source package that basically you run it on a Linux machine and then it configures a let me back up for a minute. When we talk about VPNs, we're not talking about VPN from the same perspective that corporations are looking at VPNs. I'm saying this to lead into one of the questions we got. We are talking about using VPNs as a proxy. We're using it as an encrypted tunnel out of our organization, home, or whatever, into someone else's server and then connecting to the internet as usual over that. So if you do Streisand, you have to pay for a cloud instance. So if you do this with like DigitalOcean, for example, their cheapest box is $5 a month. My apologies, I had to pause and sneeze there for a second. I didn't want to blow your ears out. But you have several choices of what you can do with Streisand, and it does more than just, it's more than just a VPN. You can also do things like an SSH tunnel through it, and it also acts as a Tor bridge. So there's a lot of extra privacy associated with that. Allgo's another one that Chris put into the chat that's very popular as well. leading into the question that we had in terms of like an internal corporate VPN, if it's implemented, it does provide a layer of protection. That is 100% clear. Yes. And VPNs were originally designed for one site of an organization to be able to communicate with another site securely. That is what it was meant for. That's not the type of VPN we're looking at. Because I'm not going to hop on the VPN for Complex for me to go surveilling Russian disinformation actors, unless it's part of my job at Complex. And even if it was part of my job at Complex, we know enough about how that stuff works that we would go off and pay for something else so that we don't have that attribution. So that part is, a VPN will have that level of protection, regardless of if it's corporate or commercial or whatever. But you also have to factor in, and with regards to everything on that privacy site that Chris shared, a very well-known cryptographer, Ken White, he posed a very important question about all of that, and this is where we find the crack in the wall at Fort Knox, if you will. It relies on proactive vulnerability management, keeping everything up to date, using secure coding techniques, using sound cryptography. That's why not all VPNs are created equally. That's why a lot of people at one point, I think it was Pulse, that had some security issues that got a lot of people to leave Pulse there for a little while. And then you just have various types. No, as with everything in the tech space, nothing is created equally. You have multiple ways to solve the problem. Like, I live in Eastern Tennessee. You all are on the other side of the mountains. There are multiple ways that I can drive from here to the Montreat campus. At the end of the day, the outcome is almost the same, but the way you arrive at it is different. There are different levels of risk associated with going different paths, whether it's just the path itself or it could be conditional based on the weather. That's something to keep in mind. For example, last year when I was driving back from Montreat, I took a detour because there was a restaurant that I hadn't eaten at in a long time, and I detoured to stop at it. On my way back onto the interstate, I hit a pothole and knocked my TPMS sensor off of my passenger side front tire, and it cost me over $100 to get it fixed. So just know there's more than one way to achieve that. But with VPNs, generally speaking, yes, they are secure, but they're only as secure as the hardware and software that it's running with. Another question we got, is it worthwhile for a home and small business to use a VPN? What would be the benefits? I recommend everybody use a VPN, to be honest, regardless, because you can't really rely on your internet service provider, your device, whether it be a laptop, a phone, or whatever. You can't rely on that for security. It goes back to that point about the social media things. Social media platforms don't care about your privacy. And it also piggybacks on what Chris was saying in terms of security versus usability. And if you read Dilbert comics, Mordak, the preventer of information, has a lot of hot takes and interesting perspectives on reducing usability tremendously to actually increase security. So for a home and small business, I would definitely recommend using one. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have all your employees, if you're a small business, using a VPN to connect to your infrastructure. It's definitely advisable because that's coming from the other side of security of an organization having visibility over what their employees are doing and control over what goes in and out, like data loss protection type stuff. But from security and privacy perspectives, absolutely, because right now we live in a world where it's incredibly advantageous for adversaries to sniff out traffic for organizations and make, and I'm using air quotes here, meaningful use of the data they can weaponize. And the more data that you can minimize that they have access to and they can see, the better. Like, for example, on the topic of VPNs, I'll table that for later because we're going to talk about them in a little bit greater detail later. But moving into the offensive security discussion, putting myself in the perspective of an attacker, these are just 4 of the things that I might look at. And trust me, there's a lot more than 4. I mentioned 35 flags earlier for the social engineering capture the flag. There's more than 35. But these are things that if we look at these, I mean, Chris, aside from your knowledge and having taken a couple of my courses in the past, so you know exactly where I'm about to go with this. These all seem fairly innocent, right? I mean, you want to hire, I mean, Chris is the CISO. He wants to hire the most rock star Linux and database administrator that he can find. But he's only going to be able to attract them if he talks about what they have. With government entities and publicly traded companies, there's public records. There's mandatory SEC forms. Press releases. I mean, companies, to do business, companies need to brag about what it is they are doing to garner interest, whether it be to influence their stock prices or whether it be to influence public perception of them whatsoever. DNS, I'm not going to get into that for a couple more slides, but that one I have a little bit too much fun with, just being entirely honest. And then employees themselves. And they are probably the biggest variable, and I have probably the biggest soapbox to get on for that. But before we move to the next slide, Chris, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I was gonna just touch on because we are in the middle of an election. There's been a lot of news articles about voter information being shared on the dark web, and unfortunately, your voter information, if you're registered to vote, what party you're registered with, whether or not you voted in previous elections, your address, all of that information is public record, and it's sitting out on a government website somewhere. So and you know that's one of the things we can get into. So I mean, you can get super paranoid and go all the way down the rabbit hole and think you've completely deleted yourself from the internet. But if you're registered to vote, you haven't. Your information's there and somebody can find it. And it's public. It's literally sitting on a website. And I think each state has their own. I don't know that there's a single resource for somebody across all states, but
Not for voter registration itself, but for
yeah.
campaign donations.
Yep.
There's that one little website that I love. You know exactly which one I'm talking about. And people in this presentation are going to find out about it in a little bit as well. But yeah, I mean, foreign adversaries, whether, and I want to bring up another point with this. The media picked up and ran with that. And it was specifically Russia and Iran. And I'm not, I have no insider information and I don't want to indicate one way or another, but whether they did or they didn't, they succeeded in their objective. And their objective was to cast doubt. That being said, I've been registered to vote in a few different states, only one state at a time, of course. But I've been poking around. In fact, I'm actually going to be collaborating with a professor from Kennesaw State University starting in January. We are kicking off some formal academic research on the topic of disinformation as it relates to the election. And we've been surveying the ease of getting information about people. Obviously, I'm doing it from an OSINT perspective. He's doing it for an election privacy and security perspective to find out what we can get from state to state. And it varies state to state, but it also varies county to county. So if you're like with a major metropolitan area, like using North Carolina, Tennessee, and Georgia, for example, if you're talking about the RDU Raleigh area, or Charlotte Mecklenburg area, or Asheville even, or Knoxville, or Chattanooga, Nashville, or Memphis, and definitely Atlanta, the counties that those cities are contained within are going to have more resources than the county that they make Jack Daniels in that has a population of 361 according to the bottle. So they're going to have more expertise. They're going to have more budget to throw at the security, and it's just going to be more robust. I hate to say it, but information sharing and data privacy to a degree is a partisan issue right now. Both parties have concerns with both sides of the coin for different reasons. And just staying completely politically androgynous, that's the term I like to use there. They both care about it for different reasons. Do you have anything else before we move to the next slide, Chris?
No, well, I mean, maybe from the corporate side, less from the personal side, like job postings, or even public records requests. So we've gotten some public records requests at the county for penetration tests or security assessment results, which is obviously somebody's phishing. There actually is there's a loophole in the state public records law for security tools specifically, so that we don't have to job postings. I'm very vague with job posting. So, what Joe was referring to, if I'm looking for, I don't know, somebody in my SOC, I may say, that I want somebody with experience with firewalls. I am not going to say experience with XYZ firewall on OS version such and such. Because that's valuable information to an attacker. If I know what firewall you use, and more specifically what OS version you're on, I know exactly what vulnerabilities to target. Employees posting on social media, that's a whole nother can of worms.
I don't even think that's worms. I think that's rattlesnakes.
And it's very, that's super hard to control, because Buncombe County has social media sites, and we do have a PR team that has Facebook sites. So I can't really prevent people from going to Facebook, because I can't lock down like the specific page of Facebook to only the county one, so that people can only go to the county site when they're on network. And that kind of gets into education more than anything. I mean, some of these are things that the technology can't fix. DNS records, Joe's going to get into that a little bit more later. So there are some security things you can do at a corporate level, or maybe even at your own personal level if you host your own domain for DNS, but they can also be used against you. So
100%.
Kind of everything here is a kind of a two-way deal, and that's where the defense in depth comes into play. So and I've heard this before too, with firewalls, isn't and I hear this from people in the IT department at the county. We don't need to do that because the firewall's going to stop them. And you always have to ask the question, well, what if the firewall fails? And people like to say, well, firewalls don't fail. And on a maybe they don't on a strictly technical basis, but you have an individual who is creating those rules. If they mistype an IP or anything of that nature, I mean, something is going to get in. So you can't depend on one layer. The onion layers too that Joe was talking about. That is maybe your most external layer. But if somebody gets through that, then what? And if somebody gets through that, then what? And the more you can put in place, I think the better you can do to keep an attacker out. That's we're separating security and privacy a little bit here, but I was going to go back to VPNs too and touch on that real quick. I think the primary differences with personal use of a VPN and corporate use is separation of security and privacy. I think that they both do both, but a corporate VPN is more designed for security purposes, whereas you using a VPN for personal use is definitely going to be more for privacy. I would say most people that want to use a VPN for personal use is to keep your DNS and what websites you go to and things of that nature private from your internet service provider who has been taking that information and marketing it. And it changes your threat model a little bit too when you're looking at it from that aspect versus Edward Snowden trying to hide from the federal government. His threat model is way different than yours. Most likely, he has to be.
Speak for yourself.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean,
I have to make the joke.
He has to do. He's back to that. He has to do everything right all the time. If he slips up, he's got serious consequences. Even me, you know, I am admittedly a little bit more paranoid than I probably should be. But if I slip up, it means somebody has some information they can market on me.
Or it means that I can send you some really annoying holiday gifts.
Right. I mean, it's
or a birthday card.
The consequences are very different. So,
Yeah.
and that's definitely something to keep in mind, especially when we're going back to the privacy and security and versus your convenience stuff. I mean, there are things I adamantly will not use. And there are other things that I won't use all the time. I mean, I will even occasionally disconnect my VPN if I can't get to a particular website, regardless of what VPN server I'm using, because all the IPs have been blacklisted. Even Craigslist.
Absolutely.
You know, I had Craigslist on occasion, and it says this IP is prevented from going to Craigslist. Well, I mean, if I really want to use Craigslist, I have two options. I either don't use it, or I disconnect my VPN and my ISP sees my traffic.
Yep. On the topic of firewalls, anytime I hear someone say firewalls are absolute, this is what I bring up. This is the firewall module of the Nmap scripting engine, Nmap being the network mapper and support scanner. Using this tool to its maximum capability will allow an adversary to be able to ascertain pretty much any firewall rule you have externally. It may not pick up on like the on like forwarding and routing rules, but it will pick up on most other rules. So it's definitely something that's fairly interesting. But on the topic of job postings, at the end of the day, people need to know what they are going to apply for. I'm not going to apply for a position like, for example, if I were in the market for a SOC role, Security Operations Center, I don't have experience with Splunk. So if I see Splunk in the job posting and nothing else, I'm going to probably avoid applying for it. I spent some time as a Unix admin. Does that mean I can do Windows sysadmin stuff? Absolutely, but I don't have the experience. And honestly, I think Chris can attest to this. It's a waste of time for everybody, from the interviewer to the hiring manager to the applicant and HR, to go through and interview someone who is either not interested or not qualified for a position. And you can also pick up on some cultural cues. And when we get to the demonstration portion of this, I'm just going to go and look at some job postings, and we're going to pick it apart and see what we can learn. Whenever I was competing in the DerbyCon SECTF, one of the things was you had to find a vulnerability for your target company. Well, I found a career posting on their website that said that they were seeking an Oracle ERP administrator. And within the posting, it said that you must have explicit experience with Oracle ERP version 12.2.5. Well, right here in Exploit DB, it was 12.2.4. My apologies for that. But I'm just actually going to say Oracle instead. So, and it's not coming up today. Wouldn't you know? We'll just say 12.2.4. It should still be here. But either way, within Exploit DB, while this demo is not working, no big deal. That was an off-the-cuff thing. I was able to search on Exploit DB and find that the particular version that they had explicitly cited in their job posting had two vulnerabilities. One was an unauthenticated SQL injection vulnerability. And with it being an ERP system, it was publicly accessible. So there's one way in. And then from there, it had a server-side request forgery, which would then have allowed the adversary to pivot from one host to another. And just looking back on the golden days, the beautiful thing about this is I was aware that my target company CISO was going to be attending DerbyCon that year. I knew because I had done my due diligence with OSINT. I had been surveilling all of what I call the high value assets. I don't like to use the term targets when talking about people, but I had been surveilling a lot of their C-suite and some of their key employees, and I saw him bragging about having a DerbyCon ticket. For context, DerbyCon tickets were extremely hard to come by. They usually sold out within a minute or less. What I didn't know is whenever I was on stage calling his company, that he was going to be in the audience. And when I looked out and I was on one of the calls, I saw a gentleman sitting out there that his face had turned green, and I immediately realized it was him. But it's one of those cases where you've got to let people know enough about the position. Like in the Linux world, some people are really skilled with like the Ubuntu ecosystem, but you put them on a Red Hat box and they can't administer their way out of a wet paper bag. Some people are very talented with Linux, but then you put them on Unix or a mainframe and it's game over. So you have to put stuff out there. And I'm of the opinion that I don't like to say, here's all these problems. Let's just tell you all your problems. I like to provide solutions. So if you're writing job postings and say, for example, you're trying to hire a security engineer to maintain your firewall. Let's say theoretically you use Fortinet, just throwing a vendor out there. What I would recommend is within your job posting, you say must have experience with one or more of the following firewall technologies: Palo Alto, FireEye, Fortinet, Dell, IP tables, whatever else. And they just leave a specific note with HR to say, hey, if they don't mention Fortinet, don't pass it along. Because then that way, that's taking away every possibility for someone to enumerate it that way. Granted, yes, there are other ways to pick it up, but in that scope, you can either be vague or you can be what I consider description overload. And I'm more of a fan of description overload personally, but either technique really works. Moving along with public records and press releases, they're designed to inform the public. With regarding public records and like public filings for publicly traded companies, that is put into place by design to maintain a certain level of trust between organizations and the public, because someone decided that they were going to pollute the fish tank. They had to do it so that they can be held accountable. And in that regard, sometimes they provide a little bit too much information. They may directly hand me email address syntax. So is it first dot last name, first initial, what? And then I might know, like for example, Tesla, for example, they have two domains. They have tesla.com and they have teslamotors.com. And the email address syntax for both of them is different. So being able to look through that information, I'm able to learn a lot. And then from that point, I mean, you don't have to be super skilled at scripting. You can do this in Excel. You can get a list of employees, drop it in Excel, and immediately generate yourself an email address list to be able to do phishing operations with, password spraying, just straight up brute force, automated information gathering, whatever with that. With public filings, like with publicly traded companies, I'm a huge fan of beating up publicly traded companies. You find out who the key employees are. You find out who the C-suite is for the most part. You find out board of directors, and then you also find out some other key employees. So then you can start to surveil them and find out how you can infiltrate your way into their lives. You can find out things that the company's very proud of, incentives they are running, like with the big tech companies. This has always puzzled me, but Facebook, Google, Amazon, basically the whole FANG class of stocks, if you will, they are all about innovation and security and all of that on the outside, but there's no such thing as a remote employee with those companies. I have my suspicions as to why, but that's another talk for another day. But due to the pandemic, some of those companies are like, we've got a new initiative to where we're hiring remote employees now. Well, the first thing I did was go look at the FANG company's career postings and, hey, look, there's something Facebook has that I'm kind of interested in. And it actually mentioned the word OSINT. So I was like, hey, now we're cooking with peanut oil. Well, a minute and a half into my initial interview with the recruiter, I get told this position is for on campus. I was like, well, your press release said otherwise. Well, this team hasn't adopted that yet. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't want to waste any more of your time. Keep me in mind if it becomes fully remote, and move on. But then for other companies like Home Depot, for example, the public report that they put out the year after their major data breach, they talked about their concerns associated with data breaches, as well as some of the things that they were doing to be able to attempt to prevent the next one. And that's something that if I were doing an engagement against them, I could have definitely weaponized that information. Anything else to add, Chris?
I mean, I can add some personal opinion. This is definitely not a corporate work related opinion. We get a lot of public records requests, and I think personally, and I take a lawyer stance on this, even though I am not a lawyer. There's been this big push for government transparency, and that's where the public record stuff that comes from. The law basically says that if you make a public records request and the information is available, then whoever you made the request to has to give it to you. There's been a push on the transparency thing to the other side of that, where public entities, government entities specifically, are just publishing information out there and making it freely available, even though it hasn't been requested. And that I don't like that. But again, that's the personal privacy side of me. I'm fine with following the law, but the law doesn't say publish everything you have. The law says give it to somebody if they ask for it. So, even I like the voter information we were talking about earlier. I would prefer that not be made publicly available. It would make me, it would make it a lot easier for me to be able to disappear a little further. But that's not something I can change, not something I don't think any of us are going to be able to change. So
that's absolutely true. And another thing, a point that came to mind as you were just speaking, when it comes to things like public record requests, when you have sophisticated actors, they may have lawyers that know the law very well that can exploit those loopholes. And that goes back to an idea, something I've said in the past. Pen testers in general aren't like super elite hackers. Typically, they're just better system administrators than the actual system administrators. That's basically what it boils down to. They know what common misconfigurations and flaws exist, and they make use of it. Moving on to the next slide, just to kind of pick up the pace a little bit here. Without DNS, the internet's not going to work. Well, at least very well. You're going to have to know IP addresses for everything. And that's going to become problematic. But within DNS, we can do queries and get ridiculously good information. So like as a social engineer, I like to look at the text records that might tell me who they do business with, the MX records, the mail exchanger records, that's going to tell me who their mail provider is and possibly if they filter their email. And then DMARC, domain message authentication reporting conformance. If I see a DMARC record, that tells me a few things. They may be in a regulated industry that required DMARC. Like for example, all of Proofpoint's marketing in 2016, 2017 was towards the federal government because of an order called BOD 1801, Binding Operating Directive 1801, that mandated that all federal agencies had DMARC implemented. So it tells me that they either care a little bit about security to some degree, depending on the configuration, or they had to implement it to check a box. So I can look at the configuration as published in the record and see that. And then also that gives me an idea of, if I'm doing a phishing engagement, how sophisticated I need to be with the phish to be able to make sure that I end up in someone's inbox. If I'm looking at this from like an attacker's perspective, like a pen tester or a red teamer, the text records, the MX record, that's all important as well, especially if they're hosting their own mail server, because then you can possibly exploit that. It's going to be a lot easier to exploit someone's on-premise Exchange server than it is Google. But you can also learn what kinds of systems they're running and their IP space, and find vulnerabilities based on A records, CNAME records as well, that can tell you about partners and vendors, as can text records. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's other things you can look at as well, like DNSSEC, DNS keys, Sender Policy Framework, SPF. The reason I didn't explicitly call SPF out is because in order for DMARC to work, you have to have both SPF and domain keys identified mail DKIM enabled. You can't actively look for DKIM unless you know the name of the selector, and you only can find out the name of the selector if you've received an email from that organization. So it is possible, but it requires a little bit of massage, if you will. But if I'm surveilling a business, I'll be honest, I typically just run roughshod on a business just based on DNS, because that's the way DNS is designed. As a byproduct, like when I was writing my book and covering the DNS section of my book for OSINT, my publisher gave me permission to surveil them. Well, those of you who may follow Bill Pollock, the founder of No Starch, on Twitter, you might have seen recently that he's complaining about having to implement DNSSEC. When I saw that tweet, I simply copied a link to it and sent him an email with a GIF from the movie Moana in it that had Maui, the Rock's character, saying, "What can I say except you're welcome?" Because he's doing it because I released that amount of information on that. He's locking it down in preparation for the book becoming public, so people can't just go running roughshod through his domain. Smart move, and I'm definitely very appreciative for that. But there are mitigations from time to time, but at the same time, things have to be published to work. And then here's the thing about employees, and this, I mean, we can go on about this for days. We could fill up an easy 4 hours on this. But, you know, realistically, companies can't reasonably control what employees post. There are exceptions. You have some legal protections via non-disclosure agreements, and some things with employment agreements that's going to vary from city to city, county to county, state to state, country to country. And some things will hold legal weight, some things won't. Unless you are working in a hyper secured environment, like in the intelligence community, when you're not even allowed to take a cell phone to your desk, you have to put it in a locker in the lobby. You're going to have a limited ability to keep employees off social media. Even if you block social media, if that person has cellular reception at their desk, guess what? They can still get on it. You're going to have angry employees that are going to vent about problems. I used to do that all the time. That's why now I will not accept a friend request on any social media platform except for LinkedIn or Twitter, because I treat them both as public brand type things. I maintain a certain tone with those two platforms, but I won't, like Facebook, for example, I won't accept a friend request from a coworker, because what happens when I have a bad day at work and I just want to go vent? I don't want them to see it and run the risk of them running back to management. And I don't want them to see it and have a jaded opinion of the employer, or feel awkward for having seen it and being conflicted because the person I might be venting about may be another good friend of theirs. You're going to have new employees that are going to post. To be honest, that's my favorite way to find out what badges look like at a company. first day on the job, and we're going to see that in just a minute. We have those, I use the phrase company folks here, the kind of like the internal bureaucrats and politicians that like to say all the right things to maintain the favor of management. I'm tiptoeing around the proper borderline pejorative for that type of person. But they're always going to brag and humble brag. They're always going to share their company's press releases. They're always going to talk about the wonderful things that the company's doing. You're also going to see that out of sales and marketing folks as well. It's just within their DNA. You can't really control visitors. You can to a degree. You can, if it's one of those things, you don't allow cell phones, you don't allow cell phones. You don't have to allow them on a computer. But you cannot stop them from seeing things and then going out to their car, hopping onto social media on their phone and talking about it. And to Chris's point earlier, some people require social media to do their jobs. Sales, marketing, to some degree, recruiters. Honestly, OSINT people. I use social media very heavily in my job. I don't post to social media as part of my day job, but I definitely read a lot of other people's posts on social media as part of my day job, as well as company postings and things along those lines. Chris, do you have anything to add before we move to the next slide?
Not really. Nothing I can think of for this. I mean, I could touch on social media again, but I mean, I took one of Joe's classes and you needed a Facebook to do some of the OSINT. You need a Facebook account. Well, I don't have a Facebook account. So I tried to create one. And because of some of the other privacy oriented tools that I use, I was not able to create a Facebook account. They wanted me to upload basically a picture of my driver's license with my driver's license number not redacted and all this other stuff. So I have a LinkedIn, and that's basically it. And that's only for really marketing and job connections, industry connections. I say that I technically have a Twitter. It's under an alias, and I don't post on it. It's strictly for monitoring intel. Twitter's a really good place to get threat intel if you know the right people to follow. I've been alerted to things, what I would consider inside information before it ever makes it to the feds and before I ever get a federal alert, or an industry alert or a vendor alert. So, I mean, there are some good aspects of social media, but just, be careful with what you use. And that if you do go too far down the privacy rabbit hole, the like browsing Craigslist I was talking about earlier, you're not going to be able to create a Facebook account without uploading your passport or your driver's license or something that I would definitely not recommend doing.
There are ways around it, and we don't have that programmed into this presentation. And I'm not making this a sales pitch, but spoiler alert, I am releasing a new OPSEC course in December that will actually walk you through we're not actually going to set up fake accounts, but I've been doing some research and I've got some good guidance on things that help you avoid being asked for your driver's license. They're not necessarily free techniques, but they do work a little bit. So I'm just going to do a very quick run through some business OSINT here, looking at some offensive techniques. I'm going to start out here. I just updated my Jets and Nano. So here I'm in my Kali host. So you can do this in any Linux environment, but I'm just going to do dig. And this is one of those times that you don't want to put Quad 9 or another privacy enabled DNS server in it. Quad 8 is probably better for this, but I'm just going to say walmart.com, and we're only going to look for text records. So in doing so, and just to give you a heads up, I only pick on Walmart because they're number one on the Fortune 500. I know they have a very mature red team and security environment. So I have no axe to grind with them. I'm not picking on them for any other reason. But right here, we can look at their text records and we can see here, okay, they do business with Reich. There's 2 Google site verifications. There's a Facebook and a OneTrust domain verification, SFMC. There's something that appears to be base 64 encoded, but to be honest, I've tried to decode that and there's nothing that I can get out of that. Here's 2 Adobe site verifications. Global sign, that could be very interesting for attempting some phishing type stuff. Here's their SPF record. So doing netblocks.walmart.com, for the most part, like doing it this way, that's actually a really good technique, but there's a way around that so I can find out what IP address is there. So basically, I can use this to find out their IP ranges to scan as part of a bigger attack. And right here, I also see that they have a soft fail as shown by the tilde. That means that if something fails SPF, it will still go through, but it will be put in a quarantine. Alternatively, if that tilde there was a hyphen, that would be a hard fail and it wouldn't go through. You also may see question mark all or none, and that basically means that that record is there for compliance purposes, or they are in their initial, say, 1 month of learning what is normal. There's Microsoft, there's DocuSign, there's more Google. And that's the text records. But then we can go right here and look at the MX record, pphosted.com, that's Proofpoint. So that's doing it from the command line. We can just as easily hop over to websites like MX Toolbox, or MX Toolbox is one of my favorites, and viewdns.info is one of my favorites. So right here, I can say walmart.com, and I can search right here. And these are the other domains that exist on Walmart on the same IP address. And we go back through here. As we see, we can look at DNS reports for various things. It just depends on what we're specifically seeking, what we look for on View DNS. This has a lot of really, really good information, but it can be time consuming as well. They do have an API. There are some scripts that will run with that, and you can do your own custom stuff. With MX Toolbox, they've got a super tool that pretty much does the exact same thing. So right here, we say walmart.com. We search. This is looking at the MX record. We see all the stuff that we saw before. We changed that from MX to SPF, and we look that up. So, you know, when I said, oh, well, when you're looking at it from the command line, it's good that they have like vspf3.walmart.com, but then I can click this and now I have everything here. And as we can see with these VSPF domains, they actually have hard fails set. So that's actually pretty good. Looking here, let me take the VSPF3 off. And like right here, we can even look at their DMARC. And we see that their policy is set to reject. FO is to 1. They don't have a percentage set. Right there is the reporting address. So confirms proof point, and that's all we have. By comparison, for my domain, I have policy set to quarantine. I check 100% of everything that goes in and out. There's the email addresses for that. Reporting interval daily, checking SPF and DKIM aligns to strict, and then strict reporting as well for forensic format. So a lot of different things going on here. So it can be varying levels of granularity with this. Then going back here into Walmart one more time. My speller got broken there for a second. but we can look right here at various other types of things. There's the text records. We can look for HTTP sites, HTTPS information as well. So this tells us who signed their certificates. We can see if any of them are expired. Anything that we could use to cause some chaos there. TCP. I mean, there's so many things you can do with this. It just you honestly, you could spend pretty much a whole day just pilfering through this website. Try this one more time. And that's the only thing they've got published. So they actually do that pretty good. And as we see here, some of the other domains you might find mail dot, www dot, so forth and so on. Now let's go with, so looking up Ford Motors, going to their website, just pick them. They're a random-ish publicly traded company, hence why I picked them. We'll look at the careers here, look at the job opportunities. For what we're looking for, we'll look at, typically it's either information technology, it may be called technology, may be part of security, or it may just be cybersecurity. Look here. Oh, look, they've got mainframes. Not a huge surprise there, but look right here. They've got worldwide Cisco, ACI, and FICON networks. At least 2 programming languages. Doing this example, C++, Java, SAS, etc. That's actually pretty good. 1 year of Linux experience, SQL, working knowledge of Microsoft Office. Normally, I would say that's bad, but to say that someone uses Microsoft Office, that's like saying that water is wet. Then we see right here, Linux and Cisco certification. While that is a little bit descript, it's not the most descript that I've ever seen. Looking at a cybersecurity specialist, security assessments of cloud service providers and software as a service solutions. And then let's see here. CICD, so that talks a little bit about internal company mentality in terms of continuous improvement, continuous development. AWS services, so this tells me that they do business with Amazon, but then they also mention Azure, which with what they've delineated, it looks like what I don't know for certain, but what I would say is a lot of their data center infrastructure probably is AWS, and it appears as if they're using virtual desktop interface via Azure because of virtual machines, virtual networks, Azure Active Directory, etc. That's just one way to go about this.
I would say they're probably using Azure for their websites and development-oriented stuff as well, based on that, because they have containers and Kubernetes and all that in there.
Exactly. You know, there's so many ways that you can go about this. We could go down and look at every single posting and learn more and more. Like right here, there's brass rings. So now we know who their vendor for that is. And I mean, they kind of have to tell us that. But then backing out away from the careers, we can click here on investors because Ford is a publicly traded company. We see when their events are, but we can also look at the results. So there's like a 10Q, but I don't really care about the 10Q. I care about the 10K more than anything, the annual report. So we can click that right here. This is Ford's annual report. So it's going to, this is the digitized version. That's not the actual form itself yet. This is telling us a lot of the information that's in there. Honestly, if you're an accounting major, there's a lot of extra stuff that you can get out of it. But oh, look right here. This is their board of directors. So these people don't necessarily, they're not necessarily employees of Ford. They may just be on the board. So that's something that's very important to consider. But when we look here at committee membership, we can find out who's on which committee. And then executive officers, these would be the people who actually work for Ford. So I would say that if you sent a fish and you were able to make it look like it was from Kirsten Robinson, people were probably going to react to it. So looking for that type of stuff. You can even go as far, let's see here, Dearborn area code 313. So what we can do here is we can say site Ford.com 31. Let's make it more professional here. 313. So now this is pulling up anything that has that phone number in it. But now we can dork it even further and say file type PDF. So now we are able to look at only PDFs that contain that part in there. And we notice here there's various middle digits. If it's a company that's a little bit smaller, like I might find out that the directorate that I care about is within 313248. So what I would do is just further refine this here. And now I'm able to look only at this. So if I were going to do a phishing engagement, I can find phone numbers this way. I can also do this part right here and enumerate email addresses as such. So I think I might need to escape that. No, that part doesn't work. So doing the at Ford.com may not work for email addresses in some cases. Sometimes you have to tinker with it, throw wildcards here and there just to get something to work. But it's definitely possible. Like right here, here's some email addresses that we can get from this. In fact, I'd say this is kind of a gold mine, right? Chris, would you be comfortable with this being up about Buncombe County?
Would I be no? Actually, we used to publish email addresses directly on the website, and I had our webmaster go take them all off and put in a contact form.
Yeah,
I mean,
I'm a huge
they're
fan
out
of
there
that.
anyway. Ours especially, they're out there somewhere. But that doesn't mean I need to make it easier for somebody to find them.
Make me work for my salary. So this is a North Carolina publicly traded company. I'm not going to go digging too deep into them, but this is something you can also do here in looking for the career postings. So like, for example, Walmart calls their employees associates, as does Kroger. Actually, this is the wrong example. My apologies. Whereas Disney calls their employees cast members. So you can go to a company website and you can find out what they call their employees. In this case, for Nucor, they call their employees teammates. So if I were going to fish, this is something that I would definitely look at. But getting back to the presentation in the interest of time, let's talk some defense. So I'll hammer through this part and then turn it over to Chris after we get through this. So for defensive OSINT, it's a little bit more reactive most of the time. It's used in attribution and cyber threat intelligence kind of as a whodunit. And I'll kind of dispel the snake oil for the next about this on the next slide. Threat model, that's something that Chris and I have talked about multiple times in the presentation so far. You need to understand your threats. Counterintelligence, you need to snoop on the snoops. And then it's used in a whole variety of investigations. For attribution, honestly, there's a lot of snake oil associated with attribution, people claiming they can do it or they can't do it. To be honest, it's an imperfect art, and there's aspects of art, science, and philosophy that go with it. It's never an absolute solution. Chris, do you have anything else before we go to the next slide and I pass it to you?
No, not really. I mean, like he said, it's not it, and attribution is hard, really hard. Yeah.
If you didn't see it, it didn't happen.
Yeah.
So I'll pass this to you, Chris, since you've been beating the threat modeling drum the majority of the day.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, this is the first question there. How do you build defenses if you don't know who your adversaries are, or you don't know what threats you're facing? You can still build defenses. They may or may not do anything. You may waste your time on something that you don't need to do. Um, so adversarial, um, obviously, the privacy side, your adversaries are anybody who wants your information, which is pretty much anybody that can benefit from it. That's every website you go to, your ISP. Um, if you create a register for a card at the grocery store to get 5 cents off. We actually talked about this a little bit earlier when we were setting this up this morning. Um, your rewards cards at the gas station you get 5 cents off. I think Shell does 5 cents off at the gas pump if you give them your phone number or I shouldn't say your phone number. Let's say a phone number and an email address. People are like, "Ooh, 5 cents off. I'll give you my phone number. I'll give you my email." In fact, I heard a story about a college campus. I think it was a coffee shop, and you would pay for your coffee with information. You could give them your email, you could give them a phone number, whatever, because they're going to turn around and sell that. It's marketing. So I think we all have that as an adversary. If you're a CEO of a large company, your list grows. If you're a dissident, you're a member of the press. You're in the public eye, facing more threats there. If you're depending on how far down you go, you might be facing a nation state as a threat. I don't think anybody. Adam, maybe. I don't think the rest of us are in that spotlight. But depending on what your goals are and what your adversaries are, it's kind of controls how many layers you need to put in place, what tools you want to use, things of that nature. So yeah, I mean, Joe posted in the chat. There was one. I don't know how he found out about it. I assume the same way I did. We both kind of play in some of the same circles as far as the people we follow on social media and on podcasts and what. And I heard it in a podcast. So basically, the gist of it is everybody in every area code, or not everybody, somebody in each area code goes and creates a shell discount card. Well, they use the phone number area code 8675309. And then if more than one person uses that information, that card at a Shell pump, so say Joe uses it at a Shell pump in trying to think of what's let's say Boone, and then I use it 5 minutes later at a Shell pump in Asheville. That marketing information, that tracking of where this person went and what areas they like to visit and how often they go there, that information is useless, right? It's effectively, I would say in this case, it's misinformation.
It's totally unreliable. But
Yeah,
the beautiful thing is we both benefit. Like I was saying on the call today, I got over $1 off a gallon last year when I was driving home from Montreat from using that exact same phone number at the gas pump, just before I blew out the TPMS on my tire.
So I mean, there's that works. You still get the discount, and the gist of what I got out of the podcast was basically try the phone number. If it doesn't work, then set up the account with the phone number, and then the next person that tries it, they benefit from. So Mitch is posting about same email address. Yeah, I mean, I have an old Gmail. I don't really use it for anything anymore. It still gets spam to it.
Mm-hmm.
I locked it. I actually have it auto forwarded to another email address, and then I have a YubiKey behind it so nobody can get into it. But that's going to get into this too. So well, we're getting a little bit outside of the threat modeling. I don't know if Bill has more to add.
We'll keep moving because that'll hit. We'll get that in the last portion to hit home. I'm just going to gloss over the cyber threat intel. It's very similar to attribution. It's very reactive in nature. There's some OSINT used with it, but it's not too heavily. As opposed to threat modeling itself, it's focusing more on what the adversary does and leaves behind and how they got there. And oftentimes with threat intelligence, it's very malware centric as opposed to everything else centric as well. It's still a very valuable discipline, but it's not the ivory tower that some vendors may try to lead you to believe. Counterintelligence, again, that's snooping on the soup or snooping on the snoop. That's where you're going to get into disinformation and deception to help with thwarting counterintelligence. Things like honeypots, you might be able to catch someone trying to collect information ahead of doing something. It's always better to find them while they're collecting information so that you can do things to make that information unreliable, like buying gas 5 minutes apart, several hours apart using the same phone number. And then with the other investigations, because the meat and the potatoes are in the final section that we're about to cover, I'm just going to gloss this really quick in the interest of time. Honestly, some of the best OSINT I've seen has came out of certified fraud examiners. They may not have the technical chops that a lot of people in the OSINT world have, but what I wouldn't do to trade for their experience and their mindset. In all honesty, law enforcement, yes, they do play by a different rule set than the private and the commercial OSINT worlds, but they do have solid investigative skills. And honestly, a lot of PIs, I do some events with the Tennessee Professional Investigators Association. A lot of the PIs are good at OSINT, but they don't necessarily know that that's what it's called. When I got into OSINT, I'd been doing OSINT before computers were really a thing, like going back through the yellow pages and the big county phone books and what have you to find my friends' phone numbers and what have you. I'd been doing that when I was in high school. And then I had Justin Seitz, the author of Black Hat Python, Gray Hat Python, and the creator of the Hunchley tool on a podcast that I ran a few years ago. And he's talking about OSINT. I was like, that's what that's called? I've been doing that for years. So there's a lot of people that's good at OSINT. They just don't know that's what it's called. Some people even call parts of it Google foo. So now we're in the final section, and the things we hope to cover within these final about 20 minutes or so would be security versus privacy versus compliance versus convenience. That's something that we've touched on a bit. And then very briefly, OPSEC versus personal security versus privacy, a little bit of the relationship between OSINT and OPSEC, which I think we've kind of already picked up on that, and we'll get into OPSEC techniques. So starting with personal OPSEC, I'll run through the next two slides and then pass it to Chris. Know that encryption is your friend. You are not obligated, unless there are certain laws or conditions in place, to not use encrypted technologies. There are some rules, some things that I have done with various entities have, due to law, been prevented from communicating via encrypted channels. It doesn't really make sense, but I'm not the one that makes the laws. I'm just the person who either votes the people who make those laws into office or out of office. As we stated before, VPNs, they're not just for businesses anymore. Know that text messages can be intercepted and wires can be tapped. And when I'm talking about interception and tapping, that is both legally and illegally from the perspective of an actor, law enforcement, or the intelligence community. So hammering on what we were saying before, you might have a really strict threat model like Chris does, but you might be in Cabo enjoying some margaritas and your wife just be taking pictures, snapping selfies, putting up lyrics to Margaritaville, talking about how they enjoyed the vacation, all of this and that. You don't have to share when you travel. What I like to do when I travel, not only do I have the VPNs on my phone that I enact when I'm overseas, but I'll take a bunch of pictures and eventually I may even post those pictures. But I tend to not post when I'm actively there. The exception being like if I'm presenting at a conference like Hack in Paris, when you get on stage and they tweet that you're on stage, people kind of know that you're in Paris. So that's just a risk that you have to accept. Pets, family, and habits, those can all be password reset questions or clues to your passwords. Most recently we saw that a researcher, and I'm using that term loosely because I don't know, I've read conflicting information about it because of the person the researcher targeted. It became immediately a political issue. But apparently a researcher figured out what President Trump's password was, and apparently he didn't have two-factor authentication. Oops, we'll just leave that at that. You're not obligated to share anything on social media. Just because Facebook says what's on your mind doesn't mean that Facebook really wants to know what's on your mind. Their advertisers want to know what's on your mind. And you don't have to give information to Dollywood when you use a veteran's discount. I know that's oddly specific, but the last couple of times I've went to Dollywood, I've used my veteran's discount. My driver's license has the word veteran on it. And I've been hustled and hassled by the staff selling the tickets to provide an email address, a phone number, or a zip code. And my question after they do it, I've already signed the paper to get my ticket and go in. They're like, hey, what's your email address? Is this required to complete the transaction? No. What's your phone number? Is this required to complete the transaction? No. What's your zip code? Is this required to complete the transaction? The first time that happened, the woman was like, we're giving you this big discount. You can't give us any of this information. I'm not one of those you're welcome for my service type veterans. I'm really not. In fact, they kind of annoy me. But at that moment, I was like, I gave this country 7 years of my life on a submarine. I don't think you need an email address for me to go ride the roller coasters. This park is going to be just fine without my email address. I've done my research on your company. You have enough of your own email addresses at Dollywood.com and at HirschfieldFamilyEntertainment.com. So you're not obligated to give any information. And I'm going to turn it over to Chris to finalize that slide as we transition to the next one.
I will say, I mean, you can give them a fake address, a fake email address, make one up on the fly. I mean, so this is where we get into the lawyer thing. There's certain people that you don't lie to. So any federal agency, trying to think of the right word.
If they can put you in jail or litigate you hard.
Yeah, don't lie to them.
Dollywood is not one of those organizations, though.
You can lie to hotels. I mean, you can check in with fake IDs under aliases. I mean, there's stuff that you can do. There's stuff that you don't do. There's a clear, distinct line there. So I mean, if you didn't want to have the argument, or you didn't want to, Joe I think likes to make a fuss out of it sometimes. Sounds like. But if you didn't want to do that, just give them a fake email. They don't need your real one. I was thinking earlier, maybe, you use the 8675309 number. I mean, they may look at you weird, but.
I eventually gave them 90210 the second year that I went and did that.
Yeah.
And the guy's like, I know that's fake. I'm just gonna give them my zip code. It's like, okay, cool. That's sure. It's your company's information that you're devaluing. Go for it.
I mean, you go to the grocery store too, and they're like, do you have an Ingalls card? Ingalls is local to here. No. Can you use yours? Sure. So I mean, the cashiers all have one. They'll use their card. You still get the same discount, and you don't have whatever marketing company is behind their rewards program tracking all the groceries that you buy.
And you do the employee a favor by giving them discounts on their gas,
Right.
unless they're
Yeah, they get more points.
309.
So, and it's win-win, right? Yeah, let's go ahead and let's keep moving. We're getting short.
Yeah. So with people search engines, I'm a huge fan of these. True People Search, Family Tree Now, etc. Melissa.com is another really good one. Honestly, the advice with those, opt out, but some exclusions apply. And those exclusions really is if the information is false or incredibly misleading, I recommend leaving it. If if you can update the information without providing any sort of documentation, such as a phone bill or driver's license, by all means, update it with some bogus information, because you want to reduce the fidelity or the ability to corroborate that data. Um, Something that I like to do when I travel to Europe, if I go to countries in the EU, I will connect to unsecured Wi-Fi. I know, but I will exercise my right to be forgotten, which is a provision of the GDPR, because they're going to see a non-secure IP address from an EU country. Most people, most organizations are not going to require any further litmus to do the steps of right to be forgotten, which requires companies to either permanently delete or irreversibly obfuscate your information. So if you travel to Europe, that's a really cool hack to do with that. It's an excuse to go sit in a French cafe on a laptop with a big mustache to look hyper suspicious. Passwords. This is a very hot topic right now. I've seen people bickering about this left and right on Twitter. To be honest, I'll be honest. Password managers are your friend. I literally know 2 passwords: the one to get into my Pi hole, and the one to get into my password manager. Of course, the one to get into my computer, but I may or may not have some biometrics and multi-factor authentication with that too. But with that, with password managers, they're your friend. Use the strongest that you can. Like my password manager supports up to 64 characters and multiple complexities. My thumb rule is I do the strongest that both the application or website will support, or the strongest that my password manager will support. If I feel something is too weak, like say 8 characters or less, or they don't require, or they don't allow symbols, I have to make a decision based on what that site is giving me whenever I go with it. Do I just hit the red X, or do I continue with registration? And unfortunately, there are sites that I have to use that require garbage passwords and don't support multi-factor authentication. It's just a fact of life. Passphrases, they work really well as well. They've got a similar level of entropy because of the spaces and the fact that it's based on words. Word lists are not effective against passphrases. It's far more complex for someone to brute force a passphrase than it is a password. But I'm about to say something controversial that I saw on Twitter. Passwords don't have to be strong. This just completely contradicts the last slide. How did this get into the presentation, Chris? One can only guess, right?
Yeah.
Well, at least there's an ellipsis here, which indicates that I'm about to hit on another point. If you use a strong form of multi-factor authentication, not all multi-factor authentication is created equally. I would say of the types listed here, SMS, which is text message based, is probably the least secure of them all. But within the information security industry, people love to hate and take a dump all over it. It's better than nothing. That's just the reality. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Pretty much all your banks still only use SMS. So,
yeah, exactly.
I mean, yeah.
I've got one that allows me to use Duo. I don't have any that allow me to use my YubiKey. But with that, you have applications like Duo, Google Authenticator, Microsoft has their own now. There's all sorts of things out there that allow you to do it. That's probably your second strongest, just based on the threat model of your phone and the fact you have to have your phone. Biometric, I would say is probably the second strongest. In many cases, it's actually the strongest, but the problem with that is if you're using fingertips and you burn your fingertips and you lose your fingerprints, you're locked out. If you suffered a car accident and disfigured your face or something like that, something that required facial reconstructive surgery, you're out of that. I think a lot of us that use our face to unlock our phones now, we've been struggling with that because we're all walking around with masks on. And you can tell who's on their phone in the store because you'll see them pull their mask down for a second, pull their phone up, and then put their mask back up. And it's like, oh, they use biometric authentication. They're a security-minded person. I like them.
I'll caveat that too. There was some court cases. And I think it's been the most recent one has been the opposite of the initial one. But the initial one was that you could be compelled to provide your biometrics because it's physical. But
Yep.
requiring a password would require a court order. So I think that the most recent case law with that was reversed. But I'm still, again, I'm this is the paranoid part of me. If I'm going through airport security, as an example, I turn my phone off when I go through airport security. And then once I get to the other side, when you turn it back on, it will not allow you to authenticate with a biometric. You have to authenticate with a password that first time.
Exactly.
Yeah, go ahead.
Before I moved to a platform that had the facial recognition biometrics, I had the thumbprint on my phone. What I learned is if you licked your fingerprint or used a wrong fingerprint, because I had 6 fingers registered with my phone, just in case I lost a hand or I lost a digit. What I learned was if you licked your finger and then you tried to log in, it would require the passcode that way as well. With the facial recognition, throw a mask up or put a hand across half your face or something, something to set it off if you don't want to power it off and power it back on. It's really your choice. And then YubiKey, Chris and I both use them. We live and die by them. A cheap hack to get a cheap YubiKey. Probably next month, Wired is going to be doing a thing. You subscribe for $10 and they will send you a YubiKey for free. It says Wired, but it's still a YubiKey. So I have that one, which is a USB-A, and then I have a USB-C one as well. Continuing to move along, we talked about LifeLock earlier. Services like that, there are some benefits, but they're not as absolute as they lead people to believe. They have a particular demographic that they are marketing to that are going to believe that. Credit freezes, in all honesty, are more important because with credit freezes, no one can take credit out if it's frozen. So that's something to consider as well. But to be honest, credit freezes and credit monitoring, they're better and more effective than LifeLock every day because they actually prevent things where LifeLock just tells you that they happened. If you're doing your credit monitoring through the bureaus or things like NerdWallet or Credit Sesame or something like that, you're going to get the same notifications you're going to get with LifeLock for the most part. They all do dark web monitoring. They all do social security monitoring, the same thing LifeLock does. But the big thing with this is monitor, 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 monitor. Something else that Chris touched on earlier, Proton Mail, but then you also have things like Tutanota and Pseudomail. Before I pass it off to Chris, they are end-to-end encrypted with an asterisk. That asterisk basically says it's guaranteed only when communicating with other users of the same platform. The reason that's the case is because they use a protocol called opportunistic TLS, also known as start TLS. And if they can't access the key, then it's not encrypted. It'll just go either way. But I'm going to pass it to Chris to complete this portion. And we're about to go to we've literally got 3 more slides, a very quick demo, and then the wrap up. So I don't think we'll go very much over, if any at all.
So, I mean, yeah, it's just what Joe was saying, your anonymous email. Well, I mean, I don't even call this anonymous. It's secure email, maybe. but it is in the ecosystem. Once it leaves the ecosystem, if you email your wife at Gmail, it's discoverable. It's no longer encrypted. Anonymous email for me, I actually shared a link to a Start Me page that I have that's got a bunch of other links in it, kind of semi-organized. For me, anonymous email is using like a 33 email or 33 mail or a non-addy or something of that nature. Basically, so when I register for things, with the exception of banks and such, I generate a unique email for each site. And it's effectively a burner email. It just forwards to my real email. I can turn it off. If it gets compromised for some reason, I can delete it. Or if I do start getting a bunch of spam to that email, I know who's giving my information away.
You mean that Alabama Roll Tide 1994 is not your at AOL is not your email address? That's what you registered for my training at.
I did. I'm pretty sure I used an anonymous email for Joe's training as well, even though I don't have any good reason. It's just force of habit.
I know you did.
Yeah. I mean, I have a different email that I use for Discord. I have a different email, that I use for every site that I buy stuff from. And at this point, it's just habit. I mean, it's super easy. I actually have an add-on extension for Firefox, and I basically right click and say generate email, and I'm done. And some of them you can reply from. Some of them are free to a certain limit. Sometimes it's better to pay, but that's kind of it on email. I mean, there's a whole bunch of other stuff.
Money. Yeah, I mean, if you want to drop money, you can go buy 88-cent domains and then just set up a very quick and dirty mail server in a cloud. Use once and destroy.
So I do that too. I have my own domain. I don't do it to that degree, but I do have my own domain that feeds into my Proton Mail, and I can generate email address. It's a legitimate domain. It doesn't get flagged as anonymous because I actually own it. I do own it under an alias, although most of that information's redacted at this point anyway. But I bought it under an alias with an anonymous credit card. It has its own email that the registrar feeds to. I mean, it's my domain. It doesn't get flagged, and I can create addresses on the fly. So if one gets burned, I can just delete it and create a new one and start using that. And a domain's, you don't need web hosting in this case because the Proton Mail level I have includes custom domains. So I don't have to pay for web hosting. I don't pay for separate mail hosting. It costs me, $10 a year or whatever to maintain the domain. So I mean that's email. I don't know. Let's keep going. I think.
Yeah. The big things. Yeah, the big things with this, just to hammer on this as well, even if you're using encrypted email, it's going to lose out to people taking screenshots or pictures after it's decrypted every time. If someone has a keylogger, it's the same thing. So, don't put all your eggs in the same basket with it. If you're going to send an email, do it with the assumption that it's going to get decrypted and intercepted. Encrypted texting. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say I will not send anything that is not expected to be public. And then maybe this is force of habit from working for the government. I will not send anything in email that I have concerns about somebody discovering at some point. And I won't do it over text message either. With the exception of maybe Signal. It's a phone call because today the technical requirements to tap a phone are probably significantly higher than the ability to intercept a text message or get into your email.
And that's 100% correct. The big threat model that you have to worry about with that would be the other person actually recording the call. So on the topic of like encrypted messaging apps, things like Signal and Wicker, maybe Wire's hit or miss. My thumb rule is if I trust someone with my phone number, I'll give them my Signal. If I don't, then I give them my Wicker username. They use the same underlying protocol. Same thing with the end-to-end encrypted. If somebody else can get on the device, it doesn't matter. You've got the same issues with keyloggers, screenshots, and pictures. The double asterisks with the screenshots, some of those apps will actually notify you if someone takes a screenshot. One thing I will say, even though WhatsApp and Facebook secret conversations use the Signal protocol, I say avoid them like the plague because I don't trust Facebook. Which moves into PGP and GPG key sharing, unless you have anything else to add about the messaging, Chris.
No, I use Signal. I've tried and tinkered with a couple of the others, but this is something that gets covered, I guess, is your ecosystem, use what they use. In my case, I gotten some of my friends and family to use Signal, and trying to switch to something else and retrain non-techie people is more difficult than I'm willing to go down. And I don't like that Signal uses his phone number. I'd rather just be able to create a generic username, but it is what.
And
So.
that's absolutely correct. I'm a huge fan of it, but they all have their risks. And then regarding key sharing, I'll show you during the demo after the next slide. I'll show you how to enumerate some stuff where people share their keys in good faith for security and privacy sake. But that can be weaponized from that site. And I'm also working on research where I'm actually using key fingerprints associated with PGP, GPG, RSA keys, ECDD keys as well, to be able to fingerprint people across multiple websites. So you want to use a different key for every site and resource, just like you would, say, a username or a password. But you also want to cycle them frequently so that you don't have the same fingerprint as well. And with that being said, on the next slide, I'm going to let Chris kick this one off.
Oh yeah, so Google Street View, perfect example. Look your house up on Google Street View, zoom all the way down, see what you can see. If you're out in your yard, Google may have a picture of you there. They may have your license plates, your ISP, you order things from, anything of that nature. My experience, and I did this a few years ago, so it may not be the same today, is that if you go through the process of contacting Google and saying, hey, there's private information in this Street View image, they will blur it for you. So if you look up my address, you will see a blurred image. You can't tell what my house you could tell a little bit. You might be able to tell what color it is, but you can't see any level of detail. It's completely blurred out.
That's okay though, because you can just as easily look at
Tax
Zillow,
records.
Trulia, and
Yeah.
real estate websites before you bought it and see what it looked like then, so you can at least find out the layout. You might not see the new red door that he put up or that he's using a Ring doorbell, but you'll definitely see that he has like 7 steps leading into his front door, and that he's got a wraparound porch.
So
I know it sounds like I've surveilled him, but I've not.
This is where public information comes back to bite you. Disinformation, use it. Again, we're going back to, there's certain people you can't lie to, everybody else you can.
But
I think
rule number 1 of improv will apply. And what that means is never say no, unless, there are situations where you have to say no. But what I mean by the rule number 1 of improv, let people arrive at their own conclusions. If they believe something that is incorrect or partially incorrect, you don't necessarily have to steer them. You may need to a little bit to make sure they stay incorrect, but let them arrive at their own incorrect conclusions, and just allow yourself to be a person of mystery.
Social media, Yeah, I mean,
These
you don't
these
have
two
to use it.
bullets.
If you do use it, yeah, just well, be super careful
Yeah,
with what you post. And that for me, it's easier just to not use it. It can be, you wind up you have to be super careful about what you post. I'd rather just not have the draw. Um, I could get into more
exactly.
on it that's unrelated to this topic, but I have other reasons
Yeah,
for not using social media. Um,
yeah.
Username,
And
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say regarding social media, that's one of the major divergence in Chris's train of thought and my train of thought. Chris is more of don't use it. I'm more of use it and muddy the waters. So even if you don't plan on using a Facebook and you have no desire to use a Facebook, I recommend setting up a Facebook account in your real name. You don't necessarily have to have any real pictures of you publicly. Uh, but you definitely want to have the account. I'm a huge fan of screenshots from movies, as Chris has seen with my fake account that I use that actually does have my real name, that I use for demos in my classes. But I'm also a huge fan of landscape pictures as well. But you want to have that one trusted person at a minimum that you're friends with, so that when someone creates an account in your name, they can reach out to you and say, hey, somebody created an account in your name with your picture. I know that's not something you would do. Was that you? And you can take a look at it. And then, once you hit the barrier to be able to create those fake accounts, after you've taken my class that's dropping in December, and you've done all the things, you've created the fake accounts, feel free to maintain whatever persona you want with a fake account. I've got fake accounts right now that run all elements of the political spectrum, from far left to far right, moderate, in between, anarchist, all across the board. I have those more for research so that I can work my way into certain groups and learn more about them for intelligence purposes. Um, and then the final point, diversify your username across platforms. And I'm about to show you why. Do you have anything else to add before the final quick demonstration period, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I can tack on a few. So usernames, same thing. In my case, I generate usernames with my password manager. So I will use a unique username, a unique email, and a unique password for every website. And I actually have to remember 4 passwords because I have a work computer and a personal computer. They both have separate password managers, so I have to know the password to get into both of them and the password to get into the password manager.
Right.
And they are all unique because I only have to remember 4, so that's still a lot easier than remembering, I don't know, the 300 or 400 that I have stored in each one of them.
Exactly. And for situations where you used to use the same username everywhere, like MySpace and early days of Twitter and Facebook, my recommendation is, after I show you the tool that I'm about to show you, go create accounts on those sites with that username, and then just muddy the waters with it. Because I'm going to show you examples. I'm going to search for 3 distinct usernames. One of them is going to be absolute trash. There's going to be some legit accounts in there. I know there are legit accounts because I know the person, but the vast majority of what we're going to see is going to be trash. So it just completely reduces the fidelity of what it is that we see. So I'm going to do a couple of very quick demonstrations to amplify some of the stuff with regards to OPSEC. So just closing a few things out here. So I'm on a tool called What's My Name. It exists as a standalone tool, as well as a Recon NG module, and as a web application. So in that regard, I've got consent from this person to search for their username. This is the one that is going to be trash. So everything that we're going to see here, there's going to be more noise than signal. So it's Munin. It's someone within the hacker community. They're on Twitter. Today, the site is searching 251 websites for that username. It varies from day to day because sites change what you like the way they work, and they change whether they allow this site to check because this is running from a website. If you run the standalone version or the Recon NG module, you're doing it from your IP address. But with Munin, as you can see, out of 251 possibilities, it's found on 100 sites. Some of these are legit for the person within the hacker community that goes by the name of Munin. Some of these are not. So that's something to bear in mind. Now, going with an actual person, I have consent from this person to search for their name. And they're also in the hacker community. So we're able to look right here. There's a GitHub. So this is looking at the API, the way it works out, but we can just literally right click and look at their account. So we see it just says Sawaba. We see some stuff, BSK, DC865. We can look at that and find out that they live in the Knoxville area. We can look at who they're following and who their followers are. So like right here, we click the followers. So we see that they've got several followers. We can look and see who these are, so forth and so on with GitHub. GitHub, I mean, that's more for like the hacker community and people who program. That's not so much on the privacy side. But here's Proton Mail. I thought Proton Mail was kind of like a private thing, right? Well, by knowing their username, I can click this and I'm prompted to download their Proton Mail private key. It's an ASCII armored private key. So to get the fingerprint on it, we're going to have to manipulate it a little bit more, but we can still get the fingerprint and search that. That's something we can run with. There's Telegram. We've got Cash App, backpacking stuff, all sorts of information we can go with on this. Just to expedite the process though, like right here with Medium, we'll just click Medium and we see, okay, here's the name Adrian Sanabria, okay? And we see Savage Security is mentioned here, right? So now what I tend to do is with usernames, okay, I had that username to start with, so I'm just gonna go this route. And I search for first, last name, no big deal. So on the side I'm searching, we come across a few things like Bitbucket, Medium, okay. We have all of that. Keybase, Before we look at the Keybase for him, let's look at Keybase for the Ascension. So I have a Keybase for the Ascension. So there's that fingerprint I've been talking about. I have verified that I own the Twitter, the GitHub, and the web address here. There's my Bitcoin and Zcash wallets. The reason I use this is so that with my classes, a month or so ago, I had a few students that wanted to take the class. They were reluctant to use PayPal. So I opened up Venmo, Zelle, Cash App, and then I got a Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Zcash wallet. That's the whole reason I have this. But in doing so, that's why we have it. So people can verify our identities, which is good. But then we run into this scenario. So now we see his Twitters. We see that's his Stellar Lumens information there, because when Lumens first kicked off, Keybase was closely aligned with them. But right here, we see 4 devices. So we click that, and now we see Fulnir, Munin, Note 8, and Wodenaz. And we see it's a computer, a mobile, and a computer. Note 8, so that's probably a Samsung Galaxy Note 8. So now we know his host naming convention, and we know he's using an Android, specifically a Samsung Galaxy Note 8. But it gets worse here, because we can click here on the chain, and this is basically the blockchain associated with this, so we can see all the transactions. So here we see work laptop, Twitter, GitHub, Reddit accounts that we saw previous. And then there's a Twitter account. Here's a Facebook account. I'm not going to click it because it shows pictures of his kids. We see that he claimed ownership of Savage Security, so we know it's the same person we saw on Medium. NopSec, we can confirm that via LinkedIn as well. And we just continue. So we can see all the hosts and all of this. Some people are very strict about the stuff they put in here. Some people put next to nothing. But both Keybase and Proton Mail are things that privacy advocates use pretty heavily. And as a byproduct, they tend to put a little bit more stock into it than they should. And doing enumeration like this works to that effect. So That's just a very quick demonstration to amplify how easy it is, especially using something like what's my name.app. So that being said, I'm going to open it up for questions. I know Chris has to hop off in just a couple of minutes. So we can take a couple of questions possibly, and then I'll go through the final few slides. We've got about 3 more slides to go, but nothing too hyper imperative on the stuff.
Go ahead and let's just keep running through the slides. I think
Sweet.
they're saying the session's going to time out in like 5 minutes.
Okay, cool. Okay. If you want to contact Chris, you need to step up your OSINT game and find it. Or step up your social engineering game and convince me to give you his contact information, which I won't do, but you can try. If you want to contact me, on the other side of the coin, I'm open and out there about everything. So there's every way you can contact me. I run the Oscension Discord, which is all about OSINT and OPSEC. If you want to join that, it's free of charge. There are some things that only students can see and only mentees can see, but then there's a lot of public stuff. I just spun off an InfoSec study prep Discord yesterday. It's to cover multiple certifications, some of the practical test certifications like OSCP, some for the more academic things, some if you just want to advance your techniques. If you want to look at my Medium, there's that as well. And then again, a pre-order link to the book. If you're interested in any of my training, here's my upcoming training schedule. All of this can be found on the oscension.com as well as any of my social media platforms, because I do publicize that very heavily. But with the coupon codes, if you take the People OSINT course, TraceLabs15 is the only code. You'll get 15% off. They get a 15% donation. And the same exists for the business course, but excuse me, National Child Protection Task Force, Women of Security, and Operation Safe Escape also have coupon codes. Same deal with them as well. I'm in the process of developing and finalizing more courses like the OPSEC course due out in December. That is basically these 2 hours on steroids at a little bit different a pace, as well as Linux for OSINT and social engineering, an OSINT tools course, a Python automation and scripting APIs course. Basically, that's teaching you how to create your own tools, an introduction to social engineering and technical social engineering course. And I'm also working on completing an on-demand course with a training provider, just trying to get all of that stuff completed as well. But that takes a lot more time than I thought it was going to take when I started. But that being said, this is really the final slide. So I'm just going to go back to the question slide and afford opportunities if anyone else has any other questions, concerns, complaints, grievances, thoughts, opinions, or otherwise. And I will also, let me do this. I'll just straight up copy and paste everything that was on that slide. I just pasted into the chat to make life fairly easy for anyone who's interested as well. So you don't have to try to jot things down. So yeah, I wish Chris had the ability to have more staff as well. Security teams, especially for governments, they're definitely one of the most understaffed environments. And I would like to compliment Adam Bricker on his improved appearance.
Why, thank you. Hi, hey, Joe. Hi, Chris. This is Kelly Bergen. I'm the chair of the cybersecurity department at Montreat College. And so I stepped in since Adam's still in 1955, I believe. So, and I know, Joe, you said you'd help us do some OSINT to try to track him down. But thank you so much for the session. We appreciate your contributions. And we thank you all who were able to attend the conference. This is our last session for this week. It has been an interesting virtual week and some really great sessions. Many of those have been recorded and will be available on our website after this, after next week. So check back to find those recordings and to review or to catch a session that you may have missed. Cybersecurity is a demanding long road, and it demands the 6 values that we've built into this conference. So we've got the technical skills, the critical thinking, the discipline, collaboration, curiosity, and grit. And the Carolina Cyber Center was founded with that mission to provide training to help secure regional public and private resources, things like partnering with our county governments, our schools, businesses, nonprofits to increase the cybersecurity awareness and the security posture for our Southeast United States as well as North Carolina. And our vision is to become a national resource for the true cyber defense and cyber resilience. And we thank you for playing a part in that. We really appreciate the time and effort that you put into these sessions this week. And those of you who've attended, we thank you so much for your attendance. And hopefully next year we'll see you in the beautiful mountains of North Carolina. You can do a little bit of leaf looking as you come to campus. We really hope that we're able to be physically face-to-face next year. And I hope you have a great rest of the day and the rest of October.